record on this computer. So we've started the recording, and today we're going to work on lesson 3. So if you haven't opened Dreamweaver yet, by all means do so. Make sure that you have downloaded all of the lessons, or at least lesson 3. And I need to show you how you work with the lessons and make sure that you properly set up a site for yourself in Dreamweaver to make sure that all of this works. So I have opened at the moment in lesson 3, the first page here, which is HTML formatting. So this gives us a bit of a history of how HTML used to work before we implemented CSS, because that's what this lesson is about. So it's a little bit, it's going back to the, Tuesday, we were talking about HTML, and we're going to discuss it a little bit more in here, but then we're going to switch to CSS and how several years ago they decided to separate the content from the style. Right now it used to be that they were intertwined. So before you can really work on the lessons, this is what you have to do, okay? I mean, you can open any of them, but what you need to do is up at the top here, you need to go to Site, and you're going to create a new site, okay? So when you do that, this pops up, and we can name it, okay? So I can say this will be Art 196 Fall 2020. That's the name of this site that I'm, and it's for the lessons. Then the next thing, and you only need to build for the lessons one site, and that's it. But every time you do a new lesson, you need to do this, because more often than not, in almost every instance in web design, the pages are in the contents of those pages, whether it be images, style sheets, Bootstrap, CSS, fonts, you name it, are all linked to that HTML file. They are not embedded. So it's not like opening a Photoshop file. It's not like opening an Illustrator file where everything is self-contained. So if those links get broken, your page will not view correctly locally, or especially when you publish it and you upload it to a remote server. So this will vary depending on where you have saved the lesson files. So what it's asking for right here, and as I said, with every lesson, you have to update this and change the local site folder. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and click on the folder here. And I am already connected to my Dreamweaver 2017 lesson files. Okay. Now, to be on the safe side, if I have duplicates of them someplace else, I need to know exactly where they are. So I put mine on my desktop. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I have the correct folder selected. So I'll go to the desktop. Okay. And then right here, I have mine. It says Dreamweaver CC 2017. So it could be the same folder, or it could have been something different. I'm not sure. And for today, what I want to do is I want to link this site folder to lesson 3. And then next week, when we work on lesson 4, and we work on lesson 5, then you're going to, each time, instead of creating a new site, you're going to modify the site. So I'm going to click choose. And then the next thing that you need to do is that later on, we will create a new server. That's when you use what you'll use to publish your lessons. We don't need to use CSS right now, okay? But what we do need to do under advanced settings is the very first one, local info. Typically in every single site folder, there is an image folder that you want to link to. And we do inside lesson 3. So I'm going to click on this little folder button right here. And you'll see inside lesson 3 is an image folder. I want to link to that, and I click choose. And now I can go ahead and I can save it. And it says you want to change the root folder for this. And I'll just say, wait a minute. Now, I don't want to change mine because I've got everything working here. So I'm going to cancel this, and I'm also going to cancel this, but you're going to click OK. If I click OK, it's going to mess up for me, because if I go to files here, you can see that I had one that I named a couple of years ago, 2018, and I've used it. I used it last year, and I'm using it this year too. It's already set up. You can name them whatever you want. But the important thing is how they are linked, you know, the image folder and how everything else will be linked to it. Then what I can do in the upper right-hand corner, if I click on the Files tab, if you have this properly linked, you can see in lesson 3 all the files, the HTML files in the image folder that are contained within that root folder. And that's what a site folder is a root folder. And a root folder typically contains everything, and I mean everything that is generated in your site, at least for this class. There is nothing that lies external. And if it does, it's just an external link. Okay. Now, what I can do is I can leave this file folder or file tab visible, or I can switch to CSS Designer, and you can see that we really don't have, for this lesson, any CSS yet. Because the first thing that I want to do with this file right here, the one that's open, is HTML formatting, okay? Now, as I said, the current version of HTML that we're using is HTML5. So there's some new tags that are available that weren't in earlier versions. We also are using the latest version of CSS, which is Css3. That in Css3, it's pretty robust. And when that came out a few years ago, and browsers adapted it, it enables you to use transparency. You can actually add radial corners to boxes, and you can add drop shadows and all sorts of things that you couldn't do before. You actually had to embed those in the images that you were using. And now it's all editable. But again, it's all the visual styling that's separate from the content of your document. So with this file open, HTML formatting, okay, this is old school. You can see that they have some quotes here from Hamlet, okay? And you'll notice at the top here, we have Rosencrantz, Hamlet, and then Rosencrantz again. So these are the quotes, Hamlet. And then these are what the, some of the quotes that each of these characters said. Now, if we select each one of these, if I just, click in here and I highlight it, and if I have split view visible, you'll notice that at the top, I have split view selected. You can see that the word Rosencrantz is highlighted, but look at all of the other information that I have here. Okay, we talked about the heading tags, H1 through H6. Well, this happens to be an H1 tag. And notice that here's the opening tag, here's the closing tag. Now within that, we have more descriptions about this. We have something called a font. And so within the font, we need to define the font face, its size, its color. But also, in addition to that, notice that for every line of content, we have to repeat that. And that became really overwhelming when you're designing something that's graphically rich. It was just a bit too much. So for example, if you accidentally misspelled a word, so instead of adding an E to blue, if I forgot to put the E, notice what happens. Notice that the first word here in Rosencrantz goes black, because black is the default color. So it just defaults to it. So if you are off, and this is still true today in many instances, even with CSS, and if you don't use the correct syntax, if you're off by one character, it's possible that it won't work. So another kind of rule of thumb that I try to follow, but sometimes when I'm in a hurry, I make that mistake myself, is that I try to go through one step at a time. And then as I do, I test it. And then if it fails, then I know that it's within that step that I need to go in and make my correction. And it will be easier to troubleshoot. But if I go through an entire list of items that I want to change, and at the very end, something doesn't work when I go to publish it, it's going to be a real bear to go through and to troubleshoot and to find out where the problem lies. So that's a misspelling. But what if I wanted to change the color of each of the H1 tags here? Well, I'd have to do it line by line. So if I decided, you know, instead of blue, I want green, notice it changes. Just the top one, but none of the others. But in CSS, I can create a style that will enable me to take all the H1 tags and to properly change them in one fell swoop. So that can be an advantage, it can be a disadvantage, but it depends on what you're doing. Likewise, so that affects the color. The same would apply to the size. So instead of size 5, whatever that means, what if I use size 7? Okay, so again, it affects one line and one line alone. If I also want to change the font, so instead of Verdana, if I wanted to change it from that to maybe Times, then I would have to change that line by line. And again, if you're off by one character with some of this, it can be a real bear. So again, for example, if I put in an extra E for green, that doesn't work. I don't know what the heck that came up with. So normally that just goes to the default. Well, see that? It's a different green. Very bizarre. But that, I mean, that's old school. That's really how it used to work. Okay. So the next step is to go to HTML defaults. And this is when you are using CSS, whether you are or you're not, it doesn't really make any difference. So I'll go to Files. And I'm going to go in here and I want, let's double click HTML defaults. There we go. So as you can see, this looks very similar to what I did the other day. And let me go ahead and try to zoom in so you can see this a little bit better. Okay, so without any structuring with CSS at all, okay, the default, even if you're not using any styles, the default will go to the color of the text will go to black. This will be the default sizes from H1 through H6. And for a paragraph tag, again, the color will be black and we'll have a default size. Now you can always zoom in and zoom out, but again, typically it's a little bit different, and well, it's more than a little bit, it's significantly different from print. In print, if I specify 12-point type, it's 12-point, and that's it. And when text is rendered in a browser, it really, if nothing is specified in your document about the size that the type should be, then typically the browser will render it at a default size and use the default settings. The default size for most browsers is about 16 pixels. But again, you can go into your browser settings and you can change the size of all of it. And remember, I used unordered list the other day. And if we look at the structure of a really basic page, it really follows what we were doing the other day. Again, I specified that they are illustrating the doc type here. This means that we're using HTML5. But again, using our metaphor as a sandwich, here's the opening tag, HTML, here's the closing tag. Within that is the head of the document, not to be confused with header, which is something that we will talk about later. And within that, they have the title. So that's default styling, CSS. Okay, so that will be, that would be in the tab. We do that. And then after the head, we have the body. And that is really where the meat and the cheese and the core of the content of your page lies in here. Okay, so we have H1 tags, 1 through 6 that they've demonstrated. They have a P tag for a paragraph tag, and they have an unordered list that they've created with the list items contained within it. So even if your page is not styled, it will contain styles and it will incorporate the default styles. Now, the goal when you're designing and you're using style sheets is to make sure that everything that you do looks the same depending on, it doesn't matter what browser the end user is using. Okay. And that can be, for the most part, that will work pretty well. At the moment, at the time that the 2017 textbook was written, and it may have changed a little bit, that the dominant browser was Chrome, and over 70% of users were using it. Next to that was Firefox, and then Internet Explorer. And I think the only reason that many people still use Internet Explorer is because it comes with their computer. But I would avoid using Internet Explorer, although I used to be years ago a big fan of it. But in past several years, they've kind of not kept up with the current W3C versions. And then after that, with even a smaller percentage, maybe between 3 and 5% is Safari. And then we have Opera and other browsers as well. So the important thing to remember, though, is that the goal for you is to make sure that your document looks the same in all browsers, and not only all browsers, but multiple versions of browsers. So the testing of your website can be kind of overwhelming sometimes. Okay, so that's all that this part of the lesson talks about. The next thing is that I wanted to go to the CSS. Let's see, I'm going to look here just for a second because I want to talk about, here we go, how CSS works when you're defining. It doesn't matter whether you're defining text or an image or whatever, but it fundamentally uses something called the box model. Okay, so that's why I'm pulling this up. If you have your textbook in front of you, it would be on page 72. So you can see using this box model, and it's amazing how much of this, with just a little piece of text that you can control the visibility of it and its styling. That if I had an H1 tag, okay, and something contained within it, okay, around that, look at the border, okay, we have a border. We have the top, right, bottom, and left. Now, that border can be defined, meaning it can be an outline, and you can determine its thickness, or not. You can have none, but that border still exists, okay? Not only that, but you can define on that border, you can determine the top, right, bottom, and left separately from one another. They don't all have to be the same. I can have, if I wish, just a left border, and no right, no top, and no bottom. I can have just a top and a bottom, or I can have just a right part of a border. It's really up to you, or they can all be different. Then the space between that border, there is the default padding, and that's what this is in here, contained in here. And again, the top, right, bottom, and left can all be controlled separately. Maybe you need a little bit more padding to the right, or you need a little bit more to the left, or you need a little bit more on the bottom. They can all be controlled separately. And then the space outside of this box is called the margin. And it too, on the top, right, bottom, and left, can be controlled separately. The measurements that are used can all be separate. And the margins is the distance between this object and whatever is next to it. So you have all of these factors to take into consideration when you're creating your CSS. Now, how that works is that I want to use, I'm going to open up the box model. Where is it? HTML, right here. There we go. So let me go ahead and here, let me zoom in a little bit so I can see this. You can see this a little bit better. Not quite so big. Zoom out a little bit. And I probably want to switch to Css Designer just to show you what this is doing. And you can see right here, they have something called styles in here that they have preset for us. Okay. So now what I can do is I can select each of these elements and I can come back in here and I can see, you know, if I select any one of these elements, okay, I can see what's going on here. That, for example, I have under style that they have created is a style sheet. But I believe if I look at the code here, this might be, yeah, this, in this particular case, there's 3 different ways that you can create style sheets. That you can have embedded, similar to what we had with the first document that we looked at, that it would be similar to something like the old school embedded HTML instructions. You can have an internal style sheet, which is what they have done here. So they've named it the style, okay, style type, and it's the text CSS. And within that, they have created a class called box model, and they've applied to that class h1 tag. They also have applied box model to the paragraph tag, box model to the strong tag, and box model to the emphasis or the italic tag. Now, all of these can be changed, but remember when we were independently of one another, but we would have to create separate styles. But they can, in this particular instance, they can be all, instead of having to change it line by line, they can be changed uniformly. So you can see that I can change it here, or I can change it over here if I wish. And to the right, you can see the properties panel. And you'll notice that we have margins at the top of 5, bottom 5, 10, or 5, and 5 to the right. We have padding settings of 5 pixels all the way around. Okay, and as I scroll down here, I can see all the different particular properties that they've assigned to this. Now, I was explaining to you that, that this is an internal style sheet. Typically, you use an external one that you attach to the page, and that will be linked. This one is embedded, so there's never an issue. But again, the whole point of creating CSS was to separate the styling from the content. And as you can see here, we have our text and we just have basic HTML and syntax in here, but nothing that governs its color, nothing that governs its size, nothing that governs its font. So for example, let's change a couple of things in here. How about the width of our columns? Right now it's set to 550 pixels. This width can be set in a couple of different ways. It can be set in specific pixel sizes, or it can be set in percentages. So for example, if I decided, you know what, instead of 550 pixels, if I wanted this column to span the entire width of whatever size browser setting I had, then I could do that. So if I put in 100 and I put in %, watch what happens. Notice that it automatically changes it for all 3 paragraphs, and I'm at 100% all the way around. So if I undo that and I go back, I'm going to go back to, boom, 550 pixels. So I'm just resetting that. Likewise, let's go ahead and let's just set the margins. Instead of 5 pixels, let's go ahead and set it to 20 pixels. And again, the margins is the space around the outside of each of these elements. So I'll go ahead and I'll change that. So instead of 5 pixels, I'm going to go ahead and change that to 20. And notice how much more space there is between each of them. Okay. Now within this, okay, notice the space between inside the box here. Right now that is set to 5 pixels too, but maybe if I wanted a little bit more padding inside there, I could put that, change that to 10 pixels. Make sure that that's set to 10 pixels. There we go. There we go. So there's a little bit more. Let me exaggerate that so you can really see the distance, the change that's happening in there. So we're going to go to 20 pixels and hit the tab key. No, there we go. Let's go out of there. There we go. Notice how much space within the box, you know, there is between the type and the border of the box. Okay. Line height, for those of you who have had some experience with typography, is equivalent to leading. So that's the space between the lines that's used. If I want, for example, the border to instead to be blue, I can have it yellow. I can have it, you know, we can have it, you know, any color we want, really. Okay, but notice how it uniformly changes everything. I don't have to do it line by line. If I just want less spacing between lines, I could go back here and put in 100%. So now it's much tighter. I can change the background color, and I can use a hexadecimal number, which is what they've done here. Or I could go ahead and let's change it to, there we go. I'm going to go with black. No, I don't have it. Well, let's go with blue. See if that works. There we go. Okay, and again, it uniformly changes it all. So very quickly, you can change in one fell swoop, especially when you use an external style sheet. You can change not only one page, but you can change 10, 100, 1,000 pages all at once. Now, the next thing that we should probably take a look at, let me look at the finished version here. I think it's in here. Hold on here. If you look at, it isn't in here, so you might have to look in the book yourself. But what you should look at is page 74. And that's where they just talk about at the very top, the syntax that's used for specifying what we have here. So for example, you can see in this final sheet that they've created for us, notice that they've grouped all of these together. that are being affected in the body. We have the paragraph H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, and so on that are being affected in here, okay? Also, we have a specific one for H1, okay? We have a specific, even more specific one for a header in here. And over to the right, I can say show set, see what it's given us. And you can see that if I show the set here, it will allow me to see the padding and if there's anything else that's been assigned to it. Everything, the text alignment is centered and a few other things. And again, if I select specific, here is a class. This is more specific than one that's specified for the body. So you'll notice here, the one that's affected is the color here, and that's it, and the font size. So that's the one that we notice here. It's very specific. So you can use the general cascade theory, which means that if you set something to the basic body, so let me go back to my files here, and let's open up some basic ones that we're using here. So I need to open up let's look at, I gotta make sure that I have the right page open here. Shoot. Hold on here. Oh, wait, I have a question here. I'm sorry. Carlos, now let's say you want that color, but in a lighter hue. What would you do for that? Yeah, I'm just putting in default colors, but what you would do is you would use specific hexadecimal numbers, or now even RGB, or because you can use transparency, RGBA, so you can apply that. So for example, let's take this one here. This is the final one. Let me go ahead and open up another page here. So let's open up. I'm trying to remember which page they want. I guess I should just open them all, huh? So here's the Css3 demo. That's the final one that I don't want yet. How about CSS? Yeah, this is what CSS looks like when there is no structuring. CSS formatting. Is that the one that I already had? That's the one that I already had. And I already had box model too. Huh. Okay, well then let's look at the CSS3 for a second and let's see what they have here. So you can see, I'll show you how we can change some of these things. And some of the things that they've specified in here are, I said, transparency. So you can see alpha transparency, rounded corners, and you can see that each of the corners are separate. And like I said, you said you wanted to see something different. So the color picker, that can be opened a couple of different ways. Typically what we're going to do is we're going to go inside here into the CSS Designer. And that's how we're going to begin to do all of those. So let me go back to the other one. Let's go back to this page instead. And remember I said we have the one right here. And this one is an H1 tag, but it's the purple one. So it's pound 20 times. So if I look over here, I should be able to find, with that selected, and I can show it here, what if I want to change a different color? Then I can go here in the properties panel, and I can click right here. And if I want this to be blue, okay, I change it. Now notice that it's changed. If I come back in here again, I can use the hexadecimal numbers here. If I want to add alpha, then I would have to use RGBA. And again, it's going to give me the color callouts for the RGB. But then in addition to that, right now, this text is at 100%. So, opacity. So that would be defined by a comma and then a 1. If I wanted it to be transparent, then I would come back in here. And I could either do that from here. Probably be easier if I just use this slider like so. Now you can see that this will be transparent. And I'll go ahead and I'll add this to my color. And I come back here and you can see it's lighter, but in fact, if this were on top of something else, it would be transparent. So does that answer your questions about changing to a lighter blue or whatever? How do you open the color picker? Typically, it's once we have created the style, then you're going to use the style sheet, the CSS Designer, and that will happen over here. The one that you wanted to change was, let's see, which one did we have? I had the box model here. So another way of doing that is if I wanted to change the color here, so instead of solid yellow, if I right click on there, or let me double click. There we go. Let's go ahead and right and click on there. And let me see if I can't come up and click. Nope, it's not going to let me do it. So the old school or this basic way isn't going to work. Typically, we're going to come in here and we're going to change the color this way. The way that we've done it by actually creating the style sheets. So I don't know if that helps you guys or not. The way that they've done it here by creating a little, this is really kind of weird. The way that they've done this is that they've bundled them all together, not only for the H1, but for the paragraph and for everything else. They've grouped them all together. And you can see that the text down here is white. So, you either have to do that or you need to bring up a color picker from, it could be over here. So let's go ahead again, and I'm going to go to, let's select the text. And right now, text color is white. Okay, and the border color is yellow. I can click from here. And this would probably be a better way to do that. So how about if I select, what would be a decent color to use in here? How about a deep blue? Almost black. Let's add that. Now let's come over here. Now, there, I was able to do that from here. That's, I think, the easiest way to do it. To do it from here, sometimes if you have a rule that you can change, you can do that. But I'm accustomed to using the CSS Designer over here. And again, I'm showing the set for all of these. And really, the only thing that they've done is they've defined the color in here. And at any time you get lost, if you haven't saved, you're in good shape, because I can go to File, and I can say Revert to Saved. If I have saved, then everything goes back to its original settings, and I'm kind of screwed. Does that help you guys? So switch to CSS Designer, and then select this right here, this rule. And then if you want to know what is being affected in here, click the Show Set. That will help you to know exactly what has been affected. And then you can change each of these properties in here. So for example, let's look at the border. Since they have done this as kind of a bulk rule. If I wanted, I'm going to go ahead and turn off Show Set because I want to change some things. And I'm going to look at the border again. Let's say I only wanted a border on the left side, and that was it. So what I'm going to do now, right now, this is, instead of all the way around, because that's what this one is, I'm going to make the left, use the left one, and that's it. Okay. And instead of that, let me go ahead down here. I'm going to try and get my cursor to work here. Let me come in here. And that's 3 pixels. So let me go ahead and let's remove that. So that takes that away. Let's take this away. So I've taken all that away, and I'll take the solid away. So that's gone. Let's do that for all of it. So if I come back in here, and let's go back to the top, and I'm going to remove all of those too. And the color. So I'm gradually removing all of them from here. I'm sure there's a quicker way. I'm just not thinking clearly at the moment. But the point that I want to make is I want to show you what if you wanted to affect. And I did already remove that. So notice that I've removed the top, right, bottom, and left separately. So what if I only wanted a border on the left and I wanted a really big fat border? So I would select just the left one here, and I'll determine its width in pixels. Okay, so I need to come in here. I don't want to show set. Let's say, let's go ahead and add a property. No, let's go back. Let me go back up here. So there's the background. I want the borders. It's just not showing up the way I want it. So there we go. So under style, I'm going to say medium. I can also specify the width in pixels. So I'll say instead of that, let's make it really fat, and I'll make it 20 pixels, just to show you what it's going to look like. But you have to apply all the properties in order for this to work. Now I have to specify the style. And do I want it to be a dotted line, a dashed line, a solid line? I'm going to make it solid. And notice it's getting really fat here. And then I need to specify the color. And I click here. Well, let's make it green, just for the heck of it. And there you go. But notice it's affecting where they have applied that border to the bold and italic. Well, how that applies is that what if I were to take over here, and this is applied, this box model is applied to the paragraph tag. It's applied to the strong tag. So what if I were to remove the strong tag? So let's take that away, and also the M tag. So I'm going to take this away from here and here, and I'm just going to delete it. There you go. So now by removing that from here, notice that it's been removed from the strong and the italic. And now I have a really bold green line only on the left side. And if I wanted to add that back, I would have, the way that this is structured here, I would have to add those, that class specific to those areas again. So I don't know if that answers your question. Okay. But typically there's a cascading theory that this applies to, because especially when we look at the final one here, or not that one, I want to close that. Let's look at this one. Let's look at this one. This is a better one, I think. Okay. So for example, if I come in here, this is an H1 tag, but this is .content H1. And if I come in here, that's an H1 tag too. But you'll notice that this has a very different, this is an ID that's been applied to it, not a class. If I click, that's what the pound sign represents. If I click in here, this is an H2 tag. Over here, let's see what these are. This is an H2 as well, but notice that this H2 is different than this one. So what they've had to do is they've had to create separate classes for each of these. And in this particular instance, what they have done is they have done it really differently. They've added something called an ID, which is very specific, and you can only use it once on a page, and that's defined by the pound sign. Instead, if we were to use up here, let's see what they have here. Yeah, that's a pound sign. Normally, if I look at the last one here, maybe they've done this one differently. Yeah, if the rule is preceded by a dot, then that's a class. So just to let you know, the way this cascade works is that generally, if you apply a rule to the body tag, that will be applied across the board to everything. Okay, throughout, even if you don't assign a color or a size to text or anything like that, it will inherit that. Okay, then the next principle is that would be the cascading theory. Then there is the inheritance theory, is that again, if you don't specify something more specific in another rule, it will automatically inherit the others preceding it. Then there's also the descendants theory and descendant theory, and then the specificity theory. And technically, the more specific your rule is, the more targeted you can be. Otherwise, it applies to everything. So generally, the closest rule wins, the one that's closest to the text. That's how that works. So for example, here's the body tag here, and you can see that the height in here is 100%. That's the only thing that's defined, really. And then we don't have any margins specified. We don't have anything else that's specified. But again, everything that they've done in here, let's look at the alpha one. Now, anytime you use any of these rules over here, or you create your own. Let's look at some of these others here. Columns. I want to make sure that you can see them, and right now they're not. There you go. So when I click on the H1 here, notice that some of these highlight. So that means those are the rules that are going, those are the elements that are going to be affected. Okay. But you'll notice that they aren't affected by everything, because right here it says the color is red. We're going to wonder, well, why aren't they red? It's only this one that's red. And that's because this one has a more specific class name to it called first. If I were to remove that, okay, no, it's using red. So let's go back and let's add that again. So I'm going to put in dot first, because I didn't write this. Sometimes it's difficult to figure out, again, even when you're looking at the textbook, how they determine how they organize their styles. And they aren't as clear as I would like them to be. The way the rest of the book works is done very, very nicely. But as you can see, with the others that are here, let's look at alpha here, for example. This is be for white. That would be for the background, though, that's transparent. Yeah, it's to deconstruct this thing over here is a little bit difficult. But anyway, just to show you, to go from plain text all the way to adding colors with transparency, to adding drop shadows, to adding rounded corners and all that sort of thing, has only been possible since the development of CSS3. And as you can see, all of this in here is can be edited, and it's finding the right tag over here. So if we add over here, let's see what we have here. Here's shadow H1. So let's see if this is the one here for that one. And that looks like that might be the case. So let me scroll that up for a minute. So here's shadow H1. Let me look in here. I can also so let me check that out. Let's see if the shadow H1 is the one that's affected. Let me turn off. That's the height, that's the margin. No, that's it. So that's a different one. How about it's the shadow for that? Yeah, this is the one that text has been applied to. So let's, instead of show set, let's go back here. That shadow H1. So let's scroll down to the bottom and see what we have, because this is where we can add the shadow for this. Text shadow. Okay, we don't have a color specified, so because that rule was already added, that might be the wrong one. Again, that's div shadow. Let's try that one. Nope. Yeah, it's a little bit awkward right now to define the specific one that affects this. And that also becomes an issue, as you can tell. That when you've added the rules yourself, it's much easier to figure out which ones are affecting which. It's not always the case here that when you select it, even though that says dot shadow here, and I come over here, this one is the class. Well, that's dot shadow H1. So where's dot shadow? That's this one. So there we go. So that's what I was looking for. This one is just dot H shadow, not dot H shadow H1. So now I can come in here. And if I want to temporarily turn this off, I can. Or if I want to change the size of this, right now this is 6 points X and 6 points V with 6 points blur. Well, what I can do is that we can come back in here and we can temporarily turn these off. I don't want to delete them, but let's just change it to look something really exaggerated. So I'll make this 10. And I'll make this 10, so the V shadow, and you can see that it's affecting only that rule, the one that's been applied to that rule. So that's 10 pixels. And again, we'll leave the blur just 6. But notice how much further the drop shadow is applied. Now, if you want to eliminate that from this, then you select that. And you'll notice right here by selecting this tag here, this is H1, and the class dot shadow has been applied to it. If I go ahead and I remove that, notice that the shadow goes away. So it's being targeted specifically to this particular class here. If I click this again and I put in dot shadow, then it goes back. Now this one is a different shadow. Okay, when I click in here, no, that's the same one. That's dot shadow that's been applied to that whole, but it's been applied to the whole div. Not just the individual text, but the whole div. In divs, now that I'm adding something else to what we're talking about here, are basically boxes. And already using that box model, that if we have boxes within boxes within boxes, you can really control quite accurately the visibility of this. And this is, if you were designing this layout in InDesign or in Illustrator or Photoshop, it would be pretty straightforward and pretty simple. But when you're designing it in web design, it gets really, really complicated because then you have to be more specific about where you want to target specific appearances. So that's pretty much, read up on the specificity and the descendant theory. It says applying the Cascade theory, inheritance, descendant, and specificity theory. Okay. And then that will be it for today. We'll continue with this a little bit on Tuesday, but we'll probably jump to working on lesson 4 and 5. To work right in to start building our website from scratch. Before we leave today, though, I need to know from all of you how you're doing. Were you able to create your Wix account? And how is that going? Okay, cool. So I'll go ahead and I'll click right there. Dan has his, and he's already set. Did you have this before, Dan, or is this new? Let me let you speak here. If I can find where my stuff is here. Yeah, that's your Wix website. Cool. Okay. Question from Alexis. Anything more for this week? No. Just go over yourself, go over lesson 3 a little bit. And read it in more detail. And we're going to jump to lesson 4 and 5 next week, probably. In class, I usually spend a little bit more time with this lesson, but I think it's best if you guys just sit and read it and go over it yourself rather than have me kind of hem and haw over some of it. But I mean, the point that we wanted to make is that it is a very different approach. And when you get accustomed to these changes, and it'll be a little bit clearer when we start to build the website from scratch of how these rules work. The way that they have organized them right now is a little bit awkward for this page, but they did it just to kind of drive a point and show that what you can do. But without understanding clearly how they have changed and how they've edited all of this, it gets a little bit awkward. So this page here, for example, yeah. Okay. Yeah, because we'll start, so continue to work on your Wix website, and it looks like Dan's is already done. But, so you're set to go. But then what we're gonna do starting on Tuesday is start building the structure of the website using what are called divs from the ground up, and then add styles to that as we go so that you'll be probably a little bit better, have a better understanding of what's going on here. So for example, here's an H1 tag. I'm kind of, there we go. Now notice that when I click on this H1, see how it highlights in blue in this one? That's really important because that lets you know that that's the one that it's going to affect. And you'll notice that the only thing that's changed is color. But it could be, if we go back, you know, we could go ahead and we can add the size to this. And let's see if it affects some of the other ones before we go today. So let me turn off set. Let me go to text. Let me go to font size. And let's go back in, right now it's set to medium. Let's go into percentage. And notice how that's a good sign. Notice how it disappeared. That by the default, it sets it at 0%. So if I put in 100%, that's not very big. So maybe I need to increase the scale of this to 300% or 500%. You know, that's where you're going to start to change it. That looks a little bit better. So even instead of 300%, I might want it a little bit bigger than that. Maybe 400%. There you go. That's better. But also notice that it's affecting the H1 tags to the left and to the right. That's too big for those. So I would have to create a separate style for each of these. So since each of these are probably in their own aside, I would need to create a new rule for those. So before we go today, and I'm going to hang myself out there and I'm going to see if I can't make a change for just the asides. I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to create, with that selected, I'm going to create a new rule here. And notice that it says sidebar 1 dot aside H1. Okay, so I'm going to hit the return key and there we go. So let's go ahead and change the size for that under text. Let's go ahead and change the font size here. And again, instead of medium, I'm going to go to percentage. And that's good. See, it's affecting just that one, not the one to the right, because that's how specific that aside was, because it is the sidebar 1. And now I can go ahead and the size here, and let's go ahead and use maybe 150%, 150. And that's something else that we'll get into too. Like, why am I using percentages? Why am I not using font sizes like in points and picas? Because web design pages are infinitely scalable. So sometimes it's better to reference the size of type in percentages or in ems. So they're all relative sizes. Okay. So likewise, what if I wanted to change the one to the one to the right? Well, I could do that as well. So if I'm clicking in here and I go ahead and I create a brand new rule, it's going to automatically, now notice that this one is going to say sidebar 2. So I can target it separately. But as we're building our website in the class, we're going to target both, so it could affect both of them. So that would be one type of rule. And then we could target the left aside and the right aside separately. But since I don't know how they structured this, I'm going to do this one separately. So we'll go back again, and I'm going to go to type. And with this sidebar 2 selected, I don't want it 150%, or maybe I do. I'm going to go to type size. Oh, come on, type, where are we? Type size right here. And we'll do it in percentages. And again, that's a good sign when it disappears. And now I'll come back in here and I'll specify 1 for 50. Okay, so now this one is the same size as this one. And if I want them different sizes, I can do that. But again, you have to create a different rule. Every time you want something very specific, you're going to have to create a rule specific to it. And it's not like going into InDesign and just highlighting the text and assigning a type size to it. And you can override styles by doing that. It doesn't work that way. This gets really kind of nuts sometimes, as you can see. But, you know, I'm controlling, you know, all of this in here just by controlling these particular classes. And likewise, you know, when I have this one here, this one is the same color, but maybe I want a different color for this. So if I select this one here, let's go ahead and use an orange text for that, maybe. Okay, let's go ahead and add that to my library. Hopefully I've done this right. Oh, I did it to the right one. Okay, but you can see. So I have 3 H1 tags, and they're all distinctly different from one another. Normally, by using the Cascade theory, they would all inherit the same color, the same size, the same font. And sometimes that's what you want. But then when you want any one of them to be different or more specific, then you have to create another style that addresses that specificity. And sometimes that can be done with an ID tag. That's the one that starts with a pound or a hashtag, whatever you want to call it. It's, I guess the technical name is octothorpe. That you can only use one time on a page. And the way that they've used it here in one of these is a little bit awkward. Typically, you're going to want to use a class, and that starts with a period. And then you can target within a specific heading tag. You can also target a specific group of text within a div. And you can make them all different, and that's sort of what we've done here. We've created 3 separate classes. Now this one inherited the one from here, the color. That's what that inheritance is about, that if you don't specify something different, it will inherit from the earlier one. And this one, because it is very specific, I was able to make it different. Okay. So I've run on and on and on, and I think we're done for today. I'm done. Be sure to read chapter 3 and to go over it again yourself, just because we're going to be using style sheets a lot in this class, a lot. And next week, we're going to work on lessons 4 and 5 and start building our website from the ground up. And while you're doing that, you're going to want to do, I don't know, you can't see Dan's, but here's his website here that he's worked on in Wix. And you'll notice he has a home page. He has his digital art. Okay, he has photography. He has videos. He has a resume. Okay, and he has a contact page. So you don't need to have multiple portfolios, but I do want you to have one. And even if you have no experience with art, I'm sure you have some family photographs, or you can take some photographs of your cat or dog or something like that, a pet, or maybe your neighborhood or something like that, and you can incorporate those into a slideshow or that you can create in Wix. My recommendation for the home page is something splashy like this, single image that dominates everything. Dan is using a slideshow here that works nicely, and it doesn't play too quickly, so it doesn't cause disruption to the viewer's eye. And then after that, you're going to want a resume page and or an about page, one slideshow or one page dedicated to images, and then the last one, a contact page. Okay. So if there aren't any questions, you tell me. I think I've answered everybody's questions. The only thing that's due, Alexis, if I didn't answer your question before, is make sure that if you didn't get your optimized images done, make sure that those are done. And I hope to have the ones that are done graded by this weekend. Okay, so if there aren't any questions, that's it. I'm gonna stop sharing, and I'm continuing to record, and this will be up for others who weren't able to attend the live webinar. And hopefully, let's see, there's a message down here. There we go. Oh, okay. Okay, just looking at other things here. I didn't have access to the message tab here earlier. Okay. Okie doke. So we're done for today. Have a good weekend. And we'll really get into the meat of Dreamweaver next week by starting to build a website from scratch. Okie doke. Appreciate everybody attending. Before you leave though, some of you have probably already left. I need to do something here. I want to take roll. So I'm going to start. Goodbye, everybody. I want to, like I said, I'm going to stop recording. Have a good weekend, but don't leave quite yet. I want to make sure that I take roll. And that will be it for this week. So I'm going to go ahead and pause my recording.